Hi, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. And we'll just give everybody a moment to join in. We've got lots and lots of participants today, so it might take just a few moments to let everybody in through the portal. Do pop your name and location in the chat. I'm just putting my chat on now. It's always lovely to see where people are joining us from. Um, Thank you for your patience whilst we just let everyone in. I can see the little clock that tells us going up and up and up. So we'll allow just a moment. I said earlier, I can see Mary from Sussex has joined, and Mariana from Brazil, Liz from Wiltshire, the Yorkshire Dales, Sarah. Wow, so many people. Dave Elwan from the Wirral, Charlotte Scott from Future CIC in Leamington, Reading, Sarah, uh, Jen from North London, Andrea from Scotland. Wow, everybody's coming in, everybody's joining. It's wonderful to see you all. Happy National Tree Week. I'll say it again in a minute. I'll just wait for, I think probably we can start in about 30 seconds. And thank you to whoever put the little celebration cone floating up across the screen. Okay, we're going to start. Thank you so much for joining us this lunchtime. My name is Sarah Long, and I'm Chief Executive of the Tree Council, which is the national charity that brings everyone together for the love of trees. First of all, happy National Tree Week. And this year is very special because it's the 50th anniversary of National Tree Week, which is now the UK's biggest festival of trees that marks the start of the tree planting season every year. There's lots going on this week. You can find details of activities, including our libraries campaign all across the UK, and some tree party materials that you can download from the website. And we'll put, when everybody's stopped coming in, we'll put some links in the chat so that you can find them. For those of you who are not familiar with National Tree Week, it all began with Plant a Tree in 73, when Dutch elm disease spread across the land, and the Tree Council was asked to lead the initiative to replant after the devastation that happened. The campaign has continued ever since, and as I said, marks the start of the winter tree planting season. But the emphasis now is just as much on caring for the trees once they're in as it is for the actual planting. So before we move on, a huge thank you to all our volunteers across the UK. With your awesome support over last planting season, we planted more than 280,000 trees with 658 communities all across the UK. So thank you to our tree wardens, thank you to our corporate partners, and thank you to our amazing young tree champions as well. The theme of this year's National Tree Week is a future filled with trees. And today, the spotlight is on trees in unexpected places. All our guests have travelled widely, driven by their love of trees, from top to toe of the UK to Borneo, Japan, and the Middle East, with lots of points in between. And we're very honoured to have with us this evening Harriet Rix, Paul Wood, and John Stokes, our director here at the Tree Council, our director of tree science and research. They're going to share their adventures with trees in unexpected places and their knowledge and enthusiasm for nature. So I'll just do some brief introductions before we dive in. Harriet Rix, after a childhood spent climbing trees and trespassing, those are her words, across Exmoor, Harriet travelled across Greece and Turkey, then studied biochemistry at Oxford. She moved to Istanbul. She learnt Turkish and started a long-term love affair with Eastern Turkey and Iraq. She worked in landmine clearance with the Halo Trust and became liaison officer for a US State Department on a landmine clearance program in Iraq. She's a keen cellist. I think I got that right from memory, Harriet. And also a yacht master, crisscrossing the channel as the winds allow. But throughout all this, Harriet has retained her love of trees, and we were delighted when she made a leap to join Team Tree Council several years ago, working with us for several years in our science and research team. She is a recipient of a London Library Emerging Writer Award, and The Genius of Trees is her first book. Paul Wood. Paul's career has been full of tree adventures too. He's been fascinated by trees ever since he noticed a beech seedling unfurling in his back garden as a child. He lives in London, but has travelled tens of thousands of miles across the British Isles to gather his 1,000 stories of urban trees packed into his latest book, Tree Hunting. Paul went to art school, then he worked in the tech industry before becoming a trustee of the London Wildlife Trust. He loves the human stories as much as the botany, which makes his books truly captivating, and he has a very popular blog. He leads tree walks and talks, and his previous books, London Tree Walks and London Street Trees, are into their second and third editions. And finally, last but not least, John Stokes. John is Director of Tree Science and Research here at the Tree Council and one of Britain's leading tree experts and conservationists. He's led the Tree Council science and research work for nearly 40 years, during which time he has co-authored and authored more than 10 books on trees and played a leading role in UK plant health research, working with DEFRA, Forest Research and Ferra Science and all sorts of other organisations as well. John loves leading wildlife expeditions, sharing his knowledge of fungi, birds, plants, insects and marine life, as well as his passion for trees. And this has led him not only across Europe, but as far afield as Asia, North America and beyond. John's new book, The Trees of Britain and Ireland, was published earlier this year with Princeton University Press as part of their Wild Guides series. It's already in the top 20 Princeton sales listings this year, and John very generously has decreed that a contribution of all sales will go to support the work of the Tree Council. So all three writers' books have been released to great critical acclaim, and I know that's going to continue. Those accolades will continue into the future. I'm just going to do a quick bit of housekeeping before we hear from our panelists. If you have any questions, please will you put them in the Q&A and not into the chat. It makes it a bit easier for us to track them, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. Now I'm going to invite you to sit back comfortably as I hand over to Harriet to share her stories of unexpected trees. Then Harriet will be followed by Paul and then John, and we'll finish for chat and questions. Over to you, Harriet.
Hello, it is wonderful to be here. I'm just sharing my screen, and thank you, Sarah, for such a lovely and really one of the most interesting introductions that anyone has ever given to me as I kick off a talk. I am so impressed you remembered about the cello. Okay, I think that's working. Is that working now?
It is.
Working for the Tree Council was one of the sorry, can
Harriet, you need to go to the main slide.
Yeah, main slide.
So.
Okay, how's that?
Okay, brilliant.
Great. Working for the Tree Council was such a joy. John taught me more than anyone I've ever met about how to look at trees, starting from my interview onwards. It was one of those interesting things where I had been thinking about the biochemistry of trees. I'd been thinking about trees in a kind of geographical world sense. And then I met John and I started to think of trees as individuals. And that has been such a joy ever since. So my talk is about when I was thinking about how I could link my book into the theme of this National Tree Week. I was thinking about the trees that I was using to identify certain things in my book. So my book is The Genius of Trees. It's how trees essentially use biochemistry to shape the world around them. And there's this question of sort of, if trees are shaping water, is it water shaping the trees or is it trees shaping the water? What came first, the chicken or the egg? And so one of the very interesting things for me as I was writing my book was, what is it that makes a tree hang on when the climate has changed and you expect that tree to have become extinct? And so I'm talking about the survivals in the tree world and one genus in particular. Yes, let's go. So what does genius mean for trees? I think the very interesting thing is when we think about genius, we think about Einstein, we think about genius being a really clever brain. We might think of John, in fact. We think of a really clever brain directing something in some direction. And trees are different because they're a very embodied genius. It's a sort of evolutionary genius, which is entirely, it's part of what they are. Every leaf is genius. Every bit of bark is genius because it's been tweaked by evolution over millions of years to become something that makes it really, really special. And I couldn't resist putting in this picture of myself next to one of the huge, huge stumps on the island of Yakushima, just off the south coast of Japan, where I've just been. My book is coming out in Japanese, which I'm thrilled by. So I went on a completely pointless trip to Japan to look at these trees, which I've wanted to see for a really, really, really long time. They're some of the conifers that remain around the Pacific Rim, and they're some of the oldest and biggest trees that we know of. They're the giant redwoods. They're the Cryptomeria japonica, which is the stump I'm standing next to there, some of the oldest and biggest trees in the world. And they're also the kauri in New Zealand, which are these famous, huge, rugged trees that produce extraordinary gum that was very important in the economy of New Zealand for a long time. They're the Alerce of Chile, which Pablo Neruda, the poet, talked a lot about. And they are these kind of huge, amazing, rugged, individualistic trees. And what is interesting is that they are a survival in some ways of the land of trees that existed before an asteroid wiped out the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. So they are in some way this sort of fragment that hangs on in these strange places, the island of Yakushima, the Pacific forests around the southern coast of Chile. And they sort of carried on by a lucky quirk, by shaping their environment, by being so embedded. There was no way they could become extinct so soon. Unfortunately, most of them are now threatened. And so as we see them, we have to remember that deforestation and forestry in the 19th century wiped out a lot of them, but we're left with these wonderful examples. However, I wanted to talk more about when I was writing my book, I was looking at how trees had shaped different elements. So how they shaped the water, the soil, how they shaped fire, how they shaped air, how they shaped fungi, plants, animals, and humans, the sort of agency of trees in the landscape. And when I'm sorry, it's not moving forward. What am I doing? Yes, here we are. Oh, this is my book. Please buy my book. And when I was looking at things which had hung on, one of the genuses which really struck me was the genus of the Zelkovas. Now, this is a video which shows the tectonic plates, and I recommend you all watch it. It's not loading quite today, so I'm skipping this bit. And the Zelkovas are remnants of the tertiary period, so about 65 million years ago, the world was very hot, very wet, and a whole different sort of collection of plants survived in it, plants and trees. One of them is this picture on the top left. I hope everyone can see it. This is Ramonda serbica, although I think it's now changed its name. And this is it growing in the Vikos Gorge in northern Greece, one of the deepest gorges in the world. And it's a little pocket where plants and animals could survive the glaciations, which happened about 2 million years ago. Now, when it comes to trees, these survivals are equally, yes, and also in this gorge, we see a relic tree, which we tend not to think of as a relic tree, which is the horse chestnut. Now, the reason we don't think of it as a relic tree, I think, is that it's all around the world, and Aesculus species generally can be found all around the world. But they are a remnant of this hotter, wetter period. And the horse chestnut in particular survived really cleverly in the gorge, hanging on, it managed to keep its genetic pools open by harnessing bees to pollinate it in very clever ways. And I go on about it endlessly in my book because I think it's so fascinating. But that is not the main point today. I'm going to use as my example. Oh, sorry. And there are three more types of tree that we think of as sort of in some way a relict fossil. These are three examples. We've got Metsocoea glyptostroboides, which survived in China, was sort of nursed by people in a local village who were very proud of it. We've got Ginkgo biloba, which again, the myth says that it was nursed by monks in a monastery. And then we've got Liquidambar orientalis, which survives in these wonderful valleys reaching down to the sea, down to the on the southern coast of Turkey. And you can feel the sort of, if you go and see them, you can feel the muggy hotness. But the really interesting thing is they're all planted in rows because they used to be used for perfume. And so, again, humans helped them hang on in areas where otherwise they would have died out when the world got too hot and too dry. Sometimes, however, you get a genus that travels. And one of the things about Zelkovas is that you can find them all across the world. And I love them. I love their leaves. I think they're I love their sort of shrubby aspects and their tall aspects. I love the way their bark flakes off like sort of very cold butter when you put a knife through it. And I love their distribution. I find it so fascinating. So there are only 6 species. They're relatives of elms. They're becoming more and more popular as street trees, which is something that I know Paul is going to talk about later. Well, I say more and more popular because I have an old aspect on the world. I think they've actually been popular for hundreds of years, but Paul will tell us more about that. And I have been to see as many of them as I can. Zelkova sicula I've never seen, so I'm going to talk about that very briefly. But Zelkova amblysea I've seen every single population that I could find there. Zelkova carpinifolia, I've seen in the Caucasus, but also in Iraq, where it survives in small numbers, and also in eastern Turkey. Very interesting examples of how trees have tucked down into valleys. And then the other 3 species, Zelkova serrata, sinica, and schneideriana, all hang out in this sort of wonderful refuge in China, Japan, the Korean Peninsula, and around about there. So because they're related to elms, because there's this link to the Tree Council, and because they're such wonderful, wonderful plants, trees, which I think are overlooked and should be more planted out in our gardens, partly because they're endangered and they need ex situ conservation, partly just because they're beautiful. This is what I wanted to talk about. Here is a map of where they survive. So we've got Zelkova sicula, named after the sickles, old people who lived in Sicily. And that only exists in these 2 shrubby valleys. We'll talk about this later. Abylissia on Crete, carpinifolia on this kind of Caucasian, Iranian kind of bit here. And then Sinica serrata and Schneideriana, all across this moist area of Eastern Asia. And here are some spots on the map to show you exactly where. Now, I hope, Sarah, you will stop me if you can't see what I'm showing. Yes? Good. Okay. So first off, the most recently discovered tree species in Europe, which is an amazing thing. It was discovered in, I think, 1991 by Giuseppe Gaffi, who was an Italian dendrologist. He was wandering across the mountains. Well, he wasn't wandering, he was doing serious research in the mountains. And he found a gully with some standing water in it. And in the gully were these extraordinary trees. And when he spoke to the local farmers, to the local population, they said, yes, our cows browse on these trees. We didn't realize there was anything odd about them. And he said, good God, this is a new entirely new species. And the very interesting thing about it was, after a bit of research, they found another entirely new population not very far away. But the variation between these 2 populations was so great that in some ways they could have been classified as a different species. They weren't. They're both called Zelkova sicula. But they make this lovely sort of little but really charismatic tree. And I've seen it in an ex situ population. This is a picture here. And it grows into a beautiful tree. It was found in these 2 valleys It hung on there because it cloned itself, because it could sucker. And so two clones are known, only they're genetically, so the clones obviously are genetically identical to each other. Sorry, as in the two clones are different, but this is the only genetic variation which is known. And in cultivation, they're known as Bosco Pisano, which is the name of the first site which is found, and Sirana, which was the second site. And they're most closely related to the Zelkova of Crete, but that is still a million miles away, a million years of evolution away from this little population, which has hung on. And they're endangered because of goats and cattle and grazing animals, and also because of climate change. So next we come to my favorite. This is Zelkova abelisea, or ambelitia, as it's called in Greek. And it luckily grows across the length of Crete. When I was writing, Crete has a very interesting way of having pockets of vegetation where you would least expect it. So when I was writing my book, I spent a month on Crete, which was fantastic, excellent excuse. And I walked the length of Crete, and one of the things that I had a lovely time looking for was little populations of Zelkova. So here's the map showing where they are. They're in the White Mountains, and then they go all the way across to Thripti, where there's a sort of goat-bitten bit of shrub, which is the same species. But in the White Mountains, you get beautiful specimens, really lovely, lovely trees. And here they are. This is the Omelos Plain, which is something that was formed by a crack in the mountains and then was sort of smoothed out into a circle by the action of trees, by the action of these acids which are created by organic acids, which are created by all the living things round the plain. And now you have this lovely plateau, and in the middle there's a sort of sinkhole, which is where the water drains out and goes down to the sea. So up on the plain, or on the plain, but also up on the surrounding mountains, you find Ambelitia. And I couldn't find a picture of it, but there is a Minoan ring, which is meant to show a sort of goddess with her staff, and she's waving her staff at a tree, and that tree is meant to be Ambelitia. And so it was meant to be sacred even in Minoan times. And one of the other really interesting things is that there is a record of a very similar plant on Cyprus, but no one has ever found that since. So who knows? Maybe someone was getting confused about Ambelitia, and maybe someone was getting confused between Crete and Cyprus. Hard to know in the mists of time. But this population was really beautiful, and I walked up to see it, and I had a lovely time sitting underneath it and just looking at all this crubbiness. I think this is basically what enabled it to survive. You get this kind of amazing epicormic-y growth out of every bit of the bark. You've got these scrubby roots, you've got scrubby bark, you've got this flaking bark which doesn't let lichen grow on it too much. And then these tiny, really hardy leaves, which goats love to browse on, but which can survive cold winters and not lose too much water. These are all found on north-facing slopes, which is where they've sort of retreated to in a vain attempt to hang on to water. But these tiny leaves will also enable it to not lose too much water. And in the early autumn, which was when I was there, you get a really beautiful variation of sort of just a red tinge coming into the leaves, and that makes a very, very pretty tree. Here's
Harriet,
another.
just to give you the 5-minute bell.
Oh, the 5-minute warning already. What a nightmare. So in that case, I'm going to speed through. And here are some lichens for John. But I walked across the mountains. Two of the threats. In that case, I'll finish up by saying I really recommend everyone reads a brilliant Zelkova report, which was produced by Botanic Gardens Conservation International. But one of the interesting things on Crete is that there are two main threats. One is shepherds who create these wonderful crooks out of the trunks of the young trees. And when I was there, every shepherd that drove past had one of these very beautiful crooks. And the second is goats like these. And I think we all know that goats are sort of one of the big threats to rare tree populations, but this was a really notable example. They were sort of browsing it everywhere. So just to finish off in that case, I will show, this is me walking over the mountain to find a new population. Here we are. And here's Zelkova carpinifolia. Here is Zelkova serrata. Here is Zelkova schneideriana. And here is Zelkova sinica. And now I will hand over to Paul, who will tell us more about.
Thank you, Harriet. Oh,
Sorry
and
about
yes,
that.
you can see Harriet's contact details there, and also they will be in the chat. And your beautiful, beautiful book, packed with information. So, Paul, over to you. Lots of clapping hands and hearts coming up across the screen there, Harriet. Paul,
Yes,
if you'd
thank you
like
very
to
much.
unshare Harriet, then
Think, yeah,
yeah,
no, I will
I'll give
share
you the
my
thumbs up when
screen,
we can.
and here we go. I'm hoping you can all see that. So
Yeah, perfect.
I'm going to slightly take a start from where Harriet left off, although I'm not going to Georgia, Iran, China, Japan, or even Crete. I'm going to Norfolk, and this is an example of Zelkova carpinifolia in a churchyard at North Pickenham in Norfolk. It's a wonderful tree. I have always loved Zelkovas, particularly Zelkova carpinifolia, which you can find fairly regularly planted. I mean, it's not common by any stretch of the imagination, and I will show you where you can find some of those. So I suppose briefly, just to sort of go back a little bit as well, what I'm going to share with you today are the individual trees that I have found growing across the UK and Ireland, which I've documented in my book Tree Hunting, which recounts tales of 1,000 examples of fascinating trees of different species. These are, I think, quintessential trees in unexpected places. This one being, as I say, Zelkova carpinifolia in a little sleepy village on the way to Norwich. It's one of the finest examples of one of these Caucasian Zelkovas. They tend to have these wonderful witch's broom-like silhouettes here when they become mature. This is actually a cultivar which is in the horticultural, which is available through horticulture, which is called James Gordon. And most of the Caucasian Zelkovas you're going to come across in parks and gardens are this particular cultivar. So they probably look rather different to the wild ones that you might find in the Caucasus. They are in all sorts of places. So this is one of my favorites. They're difficult to photograph, particularly when you're looking at landscape photographs, because you can't get the size of them and the full shape of them. The tree that's behind me, by the way, is another Zelkova carpinifolia. This is the one which grows in the Rose Garden in Hyde Park in central London. And the one that you're looking at now is in Bath. This is in the Royal Victoria Garden, the one of the earliest public parks in Britain as well. And there's a wonderful Zelkova which grows by one of the entrance gates, which could have been planted as early as 1837. That was when the park opened. Whether it was or not, I don't know. I haven't managed to find that out. But it's another wonderful example of one of these Caucasian Zelkovas, which you can find in southern England. This, though, is perhaps the most unlikely place. This is in Surrey, just very close to the border with London, near Shepperton. It's Halliford Park. This doesn't actually feature in the book. This is I just put it in because I thought I was on a bit of a jag when it came to Zelkovas, and I thought this is a great landscape which some people may be really, really fascinated to see, but it's entirely planted with Caucasian Zelkovas. I don't think these are the James Gordon cultivar because a lot of these are multi-stemmed, which is more unusual and probably closer to how they grow wild in the native Caucasus. So this is at Upper Halliford Park, if anybody knows that. And then another Zelkova. This is the Zelkova serrata, which, as Harriet mentioned, is being now planted quite regularly as a street tree. This is one of the oldest ones in the country. Again, this one doesn't feature in my book. I had to just pick the 1,000 best trees, I have to say, and that was a hard decision to make. So not everything was in there, but this one, I think, I'm still umming and ahhing about whether I should have put this one in, and maybe I should have done. But anyway, I will leave it up to your imagination, and in fact, suggest you go and look at it. This is in West London as well. This is in Hammersmith Park, the Japanese Peace Garden, which was constructed for the Olympics. Was it in 1912 or 1908 in White City? And it's a wonderful Japanese garden, which has a very prominent Japanese Zelkova serrata, the biggest one I've ever seen. This is the tree which is not, it doesn't have quite the same silhouette as the Zelkova carpinifolia, but it has really beautiful bark, which my photograph you can't see, but it has a sort of patchwork bark, a bit like a London plane perhaps, but different colours, more elegant even than a London plane. And that's saying something because I love London planes. But Zelkova serrata, there are a few in the book. There's one in Stratford on Avon. This one is in West London, as I say, planted by the Japanese team for this Olympics back in the early 20th century. I think they're known as kiyaki in Japan, and the wood is often used for particular implements. In fact, I have a kiyaki wood ladle, which is beautiful, very dark wood ladle, and I haven't got it to hand, so I can't show you that. Anyway, I digress. And I shall be moving on from West London to West London again. And this is one which I know Sarah will particularly like. This is Barney in Barnes, funnily enough, in West London. So Barney is a London plane, and you can see from the bark of this tree the wonderful camouflage mottled effect that London planes have. But what's particularly interesting about this one is that it's the oldest London plane in London. In fact, it's one of the oldest London planes in the UK. There are a couple of other ones which are around about the same sort of date. This is probably around 1680, which makes it a very, very early London plane planting. There are other ancient London planes at Ely Cathedral, at the school there, the King's School at Ely. A wonderful tree, easier to see than Barney. Barney is a bit difficult to find, but in my book, there are what 3 words for the exact location of all these trees, so you've got no excuse. So Barney is really, really vast. It shows how big London plane trees can become. Most London planes were planted in the Victorian era, so most are less than 200 years old, and already many of those are giants. But when you see one of these really old ones, you get to understand that those Victorian trees are probably still growing, and they've still got quite a long way to go before they reach their ultimate size, which again, we don't really even know what that is, because of course, the London plane is a hybrid between 2 species from different continents that would never have met had it not been for humans bringing them together in the 17th century. So the oldest London plane trees you're ever likely to see are 17th century, and therefore we don't know whether they're going to get bigger than this. They're certainly showing no signs of slowing down. So this is another one of the trees which Harriet mentioned. This is a giant redwood, Sequoia dendron giganteum, and this again is in a very unexpected place. This is next to platform 1 at New Cross Gate Station in South London. It is a tree that might be 30 or 40 years old. It's enormous. It's a real landmark for anybody travelling on the London Overground at that station at New Cross Gate or passing through New Cross Gate. It has a really interesting story attached to it. How true it is, I don't know, but I'm going to repeat it regardless. And the urban myth, if you like, of this tree is that it was planted by a railway worker next to what was the tea hut by the railway tracks there in the 1980s. And this railway worker was apparently a bonsai enthusiast, and this tree outgrew his collection. So he planted it out, and it has become this amazing landmark, which otherwise looks like it wasn't planted. But I think it must have been planted by somebody, and that is as good a story as you're likely to hear. So I think I've got no reason to doubt it in a way. This is another
Paul,
one.
this is your, sorry to interrupt, this is your 5
My
minute warning.
5 minutes, right? Better rattle through these. I was tipped off about this tree, and in fact, the whole avenue of them, by Sam Village, who was a Tree Council employee. If she is still there, I'm not sure. But anyway, this is in Leicester, and there's a whole street of giant redwoods. The street's called Pine Tree Way. I call the tree Mistaken Identity because, of course, it's a giant redwood. Worth going and seeing that one. This is a wonderful tulip tree in Swansea, the biggest one I've ever seen, girth-wise. My photograph doesn't do it justice, but it's hidden away in Swansea. There it was in flower as well. This is a giant tree in Cardiff, Big Daddy, a hybrid wingnut, a very rare tree that was planted post-war. It's absolutely vast, much bigger than a regular Caucasian wingnut, if people know what those look like. This grows by the River Taff in Bute Park. The Burnham sycamore, a sycamore growing in a Scottish woodland. Some people claim it's not a native tree, but here it looks like a native tree. That's a whole other discussion, which we haven't got time for now. Another wonderful sycamore in Scotland growing in the High Street in Kirkwall. In fact, this individual tree on the Orkney Islands was one that inspired me to write the book, because I thought there must be trees hidden away in towns and cities all over the UK. I'm going to rattle through some of these because I know that I thought this was going to be much quicker than it is, and I apologise for going on too much. But this is a Camperdown elm in Dundee, the original Camperdown elm, which is a weeping wych elm, still surviving Dutch elm disease. Lombart's elm in Brighton, the only one still growing outside the cemetery. A pumpkin ash in Reading, a very rare ash tree, and you can see the graft mark there at the Museum of English Rural Life. A stone pine on the Wirral at West Kirby. A fig growing on the banks of the Irwell at Salford in Manchester. Sorry, in Salford, not in Manchester, next to Manchester. But I found this one, an Afghan fig in Chorlton in South Manchester. This is another random fig tree growing out of a cliff in Nottingham. This one grows out of a bridge in Bristol. This is where I'm ending up. The Bristol whitebeam, one of the very rare native whitebeam species. And this one has been renamed. Of course, many of us know the whitebeams and the rowans and the service trees as sorbus, but they've all been renamed, and now this is Carpatio sorbus. So I think Carpatio sorbus, this Latin genus, must refer to the fact that this grows in a car park. But that's a bit tenuous, and I apologize for that terrible pun. But that is one of only 200 examples of it growing in the car park of the Arts and Science buildings of the University of Bristol. This is my book, and those are a few things about me. And on that note, I'll hand over to John.
Oh, Paul, thank you so much. That's fascinating to see all those beautiful photographs as well. I have a lovely Zalkova story from Hyde Park. When I used to work for the Royal Parks, there was a lovely lady called Beverly Battersby who actually supported the tree there. And when she very sadly died, we put a fallen branch from that tree and took it to her grave. And it was just a really lovely way to commemorate her life. She loved that tree so much. Yeah.
It's a
Anyway,
wonderful
we'll
tree.
come
I
on to
can
how people
understand that.
connect with trees later. But thank you. So, John, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Harriet. Thank you, Paul. I should take up and explore. Oh, is it on the
That's
screen?
good. You're all good.
Still good. Some strange message to come up on Zoom. You still see it? So, sorry. Yes, John from the Tree Council here. Getting the technology not working, that's the problem. Thank you to Paul and Harriet. I did love the idea of. I've been to see the Harriet's Cretan Zelkovas. They are stunning, and seeing them in the streets of the UK is also something that that everybody should do. But in the book that I've just produced, we focused on Britain's native trees and shrubs. So we've looked at those, and we'll come back to Paul's white beams in a second. But we start with some of the problems of producing a book. I know my two colleagues know the problems of this, but if you've never written one, the single most complicated thing that I had to deal with in producing this book was what the cover looked like, because so many people had different views of what a tree was, that they wanted to have an infinite number of variations on covers. It took more time than you can possibly imagine to work out what was on the front cover, because everybody's perspective of a tree is different. What is a tree is a really quite complicated question. We probably posed to Harriet at some point when she worked with us. You all know in law that a tree is anything that the original quote is a tree is, quotes, anything one would ordinarily think of as a tree, close quotes, which is about as useful a definition as is impossible to come up with anything more loose. And therefore, in producing this book of the trees of Britain, we included all the shrubs and all the shrubby things that might be deemed as native, and that was our starting point. And that means that you have to think about where they grow. And in the vein of unexpected places, the thing that you encounter when you start exploring, looking for all of Britain's native trees and shrubs, is some of the things that Harriet talked about. Some of the species that live on the brink, the edges, the margins, the bits that are difficult to live. And these are the limestone pavements of Lancashire, where trees do grow. But they grow in naturally bonsaied forms. They grow in all sorts of weird and wonderful shapes and places. And if you want to see trees in the most bizarre places, and forms, you have to head to some of the far corners of the country. So in producing this book, we tried to dig into all those, and we decided that we needed to go see them all firsthand. And what that meant was it took me across the length and breadth of the UK looking for trees. And you look at that and you think, there's no trees there. But actually there are. You've just got to know where to look and what a tree is. And we'll come back to that in a second. And when you start looking, you start exploring, and you get out onto the peripheries of the country and you think, well, is it a tree? Well, is that a tree? Probably in most people's definition, it isn't. But if you go back to the definition of in law, anything one would ordinarily think of as a tree, you probably wouldn't include this, but this is the horizontal form of broom. It grows around the cliffs of the country. And as we got into this, we discovered that there were all these weird forms and of things that we needed to include. And so I have included that, even though most people would never think that that was a tree. Another story. But you would think that this is a tree. This is possibly the most unexpected tree that I found in the process of writing this book. This is a small-leaf lime, a nice native species, but the biggest one I've ever found anywhere in the country, and it's in the edge of Coventry, right by a horrifically busy dual carriageway, and quietly growing in the middle of a wood, there is the most magnificent and truly enormous native small-leaf lime that you'll ever see in your life. And trees do that to one. They do grow in unexpected places, as we've heard from Harriet and Paul. When we tried to put this book together, we decided we wanted to do something different. There are lots of tree ID books, but how do you do something that's a bit different? So we included lots of natural history. We included lots of did you knows, interesting facts, and we tried to do some comparative charts. Well, we did some comparative charts that showed where everything was. The single most complicated thing to produce was actually working out this little symbol here, which is how rare or otherwise is this tree in a British context. And then we threw into that all of the keys that you would expect, including things like winter twigs. And I realized at this point it's a mad exercise, because it took that single page where we had to collect and photograph all of those twigs. That single page took me over 100 hours just to produce that one page. It's mad. And then you throw in getting to see them all, and we get back to Paul's white beams, because the moment you start to explore the native species of Britain, you have to get into all of the realms of what is a species and where are they and where can they be found, and that takes you eventually to Paul's Bristol whitebeam and all of the other confusing and difficult to find trees, and it takes you to the bizarre corners of the country. Now this is one called Rich's whitebeam. Nobody will ever heard of Rich's whitebeam. Rich's whitebeam is a species that comprises about 40 trees growing on this little bit of cliff in Somerset. Is it a species? Is it not? That's a whole different debate. But if you want to see one, then you've got to head to Somerset and get onto the beach, and eventually you'll find one. That's not so bad. If you want to see White's whitebeam, it gets a bit harder, because you've got to go to the Bristol Gorge, and then you've got to start looking on the cliff faces for little whitebeams. And eventually, if you're lucky, you might find one that's a White's whitebeam, definitely growing in an unexpected place. But your challenge is that on the other side of the gorge, there are a lot of other whitebeams. And it turns out, according to the biology, that they're completely different species. So rather like Harriet and her Zelkovas, these whitebeams have been speciating across the country. And this one, growing on the opposite side to the White's whitebeam, this one is called observatory whitebeam, because we're right by the observatory. Now that's fine and great and unexpected, until you realise that if you're going to do a tree ID book, you've got to actually get hold of bits of the damn thing to photograph it to include in the book, which means that you've got to end up in some truly unexpected and often dodgy places, hoping to get down to that bit there so that you can photograph that. Because you've got to include all the bits, you need to get to all the difficult places. I did have an occasion there were occasions when this obsessional need to photograph all these things got a bit dodgy. And this is possibly the worst of all of them. This is the Llangollen whitebeams, which are growing here on the cliffs, here, and here. But as you can see, they're on the cliffs. Getting a photograph of some of these turned out to be really difficult. And I did phone Sarah, who is my boss, and said, I'd like you to stay on the phone while I'm photographing this tree, because if I fall off, I want somebody to know where the body is so that we can...
At which point I went into a long health and safety lecture.
To go to see some of these trees is not recommended on any health and safety risk assessment that you can possibly imagine, because they live exactly as Harriet said of the Zelkovas, on those places which are inaccessible to grazers. They avoid the sheep, they avoid the other things, and therefore they lurk and live in the margins around the edges of the country.
This is your 5-minute marker, John.
That's all right. we're good. In terms of other unexpected trees, we come back to what is a tree. So, is that a tree? Well, it's up for debate, really. This is the net-leaved willow, a species that is definitely uncommon in the British Isles. It's a high Arctic alpine plant, very beautiful little thing. Is it a tree? Well, that's for you to decide. But if you want to see one, you've got to get to definitely somewhere a bit unexpected. You've got to climb a hill. You've got to get right up into the Scottish mountains. And then you've got to find one. And this one is a very nice example of net-leaf willow growing up on Ben Lawes. And you could argue, is something that's an inch tall really a tree? But if I tell you the estimates that are that this thing is probably of the order of 150 years old, then you start to realize that as a woody plant growing on in a very Arctic place, it probably does qualify as a tree. You just have to walk through a very, very treeless landscape to get to one. It's quite hardcore tree hunting. And because we included the natural history of trees in, we decided we wanted to include some of the other things, which took me to all sorts of weird and wonderful places around the country. Anybody want to have a quick guess at what this is? If you get this, 5 stars, tick VG, well done in the chat. You have about 30 seconds to stick your name of what that might be in the chat. Let's see if anybody gets it right. Where's the chat gone? Anybody trying, Sarah? I can't see the chat, it's disappeared.
Yes, we've got hoof fungus, we've got birch and tinder fungus, oyster.
Not bad, but not right.
Okay, fish fungus.
No, not bad, but not right.
Does look like a fish.
It does look like a fish. The person who said hoof fungus was quite close. This is a form of the hoof funguses, so they were pretty good.
Then we've got Ramalina lichen, Trametes varicolor.
That's true. All of those are true, but this is the aspen bracket. Specific to aspen. It's inherently uncommon, and therefore, if you want to find one, you've got to go where the aspens are, and that means you have to go and find aspen forests. And the aspen forests of the country are really beautiful but unknown parts of Scotland, growing high up in the glens and the vales. Again, as Harriet described of some of her Zelkivas. I would heartily recommend that you all go and look at aspen forest. It's one of the most beautiful treescapes we have. And then we tackle. Somebody said about sycamore. Did somebody tackle, or am I having a mental? Or maybe that was this morning in a previous meeting. It was you, Paul, wasn't it? Meetings are blurring today. The question of whether sycamore is a native is, of course, highly controversial. But look, this is the near perfect replica of a sycamore. And it's definitely unexpected because it's carved onto a tomb in an Oxford University college in the 1100s. So if you ever wanted to know whether sycamore is a native, well, either the carver was from somewhere else, or the carver looked out the window because everything else on the tomb is English and saw these in the countryside. It's for debate. And Paul, that the Burnham sycamore is possibly my favourite tree in the country. Last one then, unexpected things. My single most unexpected discovery in writing this book was this. This is, of course, Rhododendron ponticum. You all knew that. But where does Rhododendron ponticum come from? And the answer to that, if you ask almost everybody, the answer almost everybody will give you is Nepal. But it's not where Rhododendron ponticum comes from. Rhododendron ponticum originally comes from Spain. It's the remnants. I know Harriet's face is, that's perfect. That's what I was after. It is a Spanish species that we brought over here in 1761, something like that, from Spain. It's a remnant of the Loro Silvan forests of Portugal and Madeira. And nobody knows that. Absolutely nobody knows that, which was what this whole little book has been a joyous discovery of. So my closing was trees in unexpected places. You find them in Britain all over the place. And I went to a village called Dull in Scotland, looking for a particularly unusual tree that grows in that part of the world, and then discovered it was paired with boring in Oregon. The one thing I learned about this tree odyssey around the country, looking at all our native species, is it's neither dull nor boring. It is great fun. And thank you for listening.
Oh, thank you, John. That was a great voyage of adventure, and I will always remember you calling me Ree the Whitebeams. Now, we have a few questions. We don't have much time left, so I'm going to go straight into them. A very quick one first from Fiona saying, what is a relict tree? Harriet, you talked about relict trees. Do you want to explain what a relict tree is?
Yeah, briefly speaking, it's something that hung on. I mean, relict is now technically not the word you're meant to use, but it's trees that hung on when the climate changed from warm and wet to cold and dry, basically. And they hung on in about 6 areas of the world around the Mediterranean basin, areas where kind of humidity and warmth could maintain them, so they could hang on in there. Loads in China, Japan, and the Korean Peninsula. Some in the Pacific coast of North America, some down in that bit kind of below Washington, D.C., and lots around the Mediterranean. Have I missed anywhere, John? Oh, and this bizarre place in southern Turkey where the liquid ambers hang on.
Brilliant. Thank you, Fiona. I hope that answers your question. I'm going to ask next, there's a question, there's one for John before we come on to one from Lena, which is from Sarah, which says, I love your hard copy book, John, but I'd like to have it on my phone. I know it's available as a Kindle download, but it's not very easily formatted for reading. Are there any plans to publish it in a more Kindle-friendly format? And I know you were discussing that with the Princeton publisher last night.
I was, and the answer is it's apparently quite technically difficult. I didn't even realize until last night that it existed electronically. So it is a debate that we are about to start. And now I know that you could. We're going to see if we can get it into a better state, but I didn't even realize until last night that it was there. So one for the near future. Sorry if it doesn't quite work, but I haven't looked at that.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you for that. And then a question actually, which I think both Harriet and Paul could answer, which is from Lena saying, with the Zelkovers, they seem to have something of a similarity of bark to what the London plane does. Does that mean they can manage heat better than most trees in a similar way to the London plane? Does Zelkover manage heat well? And do you want to go first, Harriet?
Oh, okay. Well, I was just going to say, I'm not sure, but I'm really interested by this question because Pinus bungiana, really beautiful pine, also has a very similar bark. And I think there are lots of theories for why it might be, but I'm not sure. Paul, what do you
Well,
think?
I was going to defer to you, Harriet, on that because I have no idea. But what I would say is that it's certainly a type of bark which is, as you mentioned, Pinus bungiana, and as Lena suggested, London plane as well. So different trees have different ways of coping with growing, and that includes how their bark expands. So some develop fissures and some develop plates. So I think it might be as just how Zelkovers have developed is in a similar way to planes, but of course they're not at all related. So I think it's just a strategy which different tree genera have come across in different points in evolution.
Peeling off of the bark does create slightly different temperature underneath, which is possibly an adaptation to living in really hot environments. But it's, as Harriet said, it's in the realm of the possible rather than the definitive.
Fantastic. So just one final question then before we close, which is that, you know, lots of the trees that you've been describing and that you've been showing photographs of seem to have become local icons or landmarks. Why do you think, in a short answer, each of you, why do you think individual trees resonate so powerfully with people and communities? And I'm going to ask Paul first.
Well, I think if you live particularly in a town or city, trees are really, really apparent to you if you're tree sensitive, as many of us are on this chat, I'm sure. And I think that they are the landmarks which we crave in towns and cities, which aren't buildings. So trees are those things which are there. They we admire them because they're living things. They are able to cope with so much, and we're really aware of that as city dwellers. So I think it is that empathy and sympathy we have with them in those difficult situations.
Thanks, Paul. John.
I'll let Harriet go first, and then I'll maybe.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to say two things. One is that I'm very interested by the way we relate to single stem trees as opposed to multi-stem trees. So when the sycamore gap grows back, will we love it less because it's less iconic because it doesn't have that one trunk that we can sort of see eye to eye with? And the other thing I was going to say is that I think there's something about the way they echo the cycles of our life. So they are responding to time, but maybe more gently than we are. And they echo the cycles of the seasons, and we can see time passing kind of reflected in them. But I think they give us this idea of longevity in the same way that kind of art does, maybe. They capture a moment for us, and they change more gradually, often. John.
Nice.
And
Nice.
to just maybe conclude, Sarah, as Harriet said right at the beginning, the moment you start to see a tree as an individual, it becomes a friend. And the moment it becomes a friend, you relate to it. It's probably that matters more than that. It's seeing the tree, not just seeing woods.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There are some questions which we haven't had time, but there's one very quick one. How should people record unusual trees? Apps like iNaturalist or PlantNet? That's a question from Wilma. See John nodding briefly.
iNaturalist is a really good way of recording it. There are other things like the Ancient Tree Inventory. For some of Paul's big ones, you can put those on irrespective of species. There are a number of ways to do it, but just definitely record it.
And then another quick answer. Dave Elwan, lovely question. I can't read it all out, but basically he's asking Harriet with the crook making with the shepherds. Do you think the shepherds spread the Zelkovas through their shepherd's crooks?
Ooh, Katsuna. And spread the Zelkovas. I think they probably do, but I'm not entirely sure. I
Yeah,
think it's quite
discarded
rare
walking
for a new
sticks.
population to, it's quite rare for them to produce seeds, so it's quite rare for a new population to establish itself. So yeah, it would be wonderful if they were.
Good
They
question.
offered me one. I wish I'd taken it. Really wish.
Okay, I'm going to say a huge thank you to Harriet, Paul, and John for sharing your stories. I think we've got here actually the start of a sort of Zelkova and White Beam club, loving club after this session. You've really warmed our souls, and it's been fascinating to hear about all your journeys and your travels. And I saw one marvelous comment in which was from Mike saying it's been more interesting than the budget speech. So there you go. I'm not sure that's a great standard to have to beat, but
hard act to follow.
yeah. So the links to the panelist books are all in the chat. Don't forget for your Christmas list, either for yourself or for your loved ones, if they're interested in trees or to captivate them with trees. Thanks so much, for joining us for National Tree Week, the 50th anniversary. You can make the most of the last few days. If you've enjoyed this webinar, we have another one tomorrow, which is Trees on Farms with Helen Browning from the Soil Association and Guy Singh Watson, founder of Riverford, and Ben Norwood. So again, there will be a link in the chat if you'd like to join that one. But thank you so much, Harriet, Paul, John. Many, many, many thanks. That's fascinating.
Thank you very much.